Hi, with Julian on the brown note and a review of the latest album by DJ Koze, Koze, from initially when it was West Germany, Stefan Kotzala, and he is one of my favourite figures in electronic music. On one side, because of his character and personality, he's one of the most colourful people and genuine people in electronic music. He's a very outgoing, interesting bloke, but also because he has made a couple of long form studio albums that rank with the very best in electronic music, and in a similar scope that the last Daft Punk album, Random Access Memories, was. Very long, very well produced. I'll turn off that incredible noise, that's probably made it a lot better. Very long form, well sculpted things that looked like they took years to make, and Amygdala in 2013 was exactly that. Very long, a lot of amazing tracks, all different, and like somebody had spent an awful long time to curate an album length project. That was my second favourite album of that year on my radio show. He came back in 2018 with Knock Knock. That was my second favourite album of that year. Another vast, brilliant project. So two of my favourite albums of the last decade were DJ Koze, and he's returned with another full-length Music Can Hear Us, and I was looking forward to this so much. It opens with The Universe in a Nutshell, which is fairly emblematic of the album. It is a really good track. It just doesn't really... I found myself thinking about how much more compelling the opening of Airs Moon Safari was, with another sort of 6-7 minute instrumental bleed-in. It's got this sort of tribal house vibe intro, very sparkly synths, and the production throughout this album is absolutely magnificent. It's got a nice progression into the song. It's just very much background music. We move on to De Fall, Pure Love, featuring Damon Albarn, who I don't really rate. It's like very competent trip pop, I guess. And it reminds me of the vocals from that DJ Shadow track 6 Days, where you're kind of like, I don't know if this is cheese and I don't like it, or if it's classic and I do. It's got sort of flamenco guitars, vocoder work on it. It is, like much of the album, slightly more interesting than the sum of its parts. We get a couple of German language tracks. Wie schon du bist, featuring Armin of the Düsseldorf Duster Boys. Now that's immediately interesting. And a psych folk one called De Fall. Sorry, that's the first one. De Fall, featuring Sophie Kennedy. It's a bit swimmy to listen to, like in your ears, which I wasn't quite sure about. Like everything else, it's developed. It's not like, say, the recent Panda Bear output where your first 20 seconds you've got the whole track. Every track is developed, like you spent time on it. It's just that the initial components of the tracks aren't that strong. The same with the second German track. It's got this sort of widescreen mid-90s hip-hop thing going on, bit of chipmunk soul strings as well. And I found myself thinking about the German lyrics again and deciding that it was because I didn't think the song had enough in it to warrant intrigue, so the lyrics were probably necessarily a big part of that, because without them it didn't have enough to carry it. There's some Spanish language stuff on here. Track 5, Tu dime cuando. Dime, what's that? It's like when you buy me something, when you say, I don't know. Sophia Cortesis, wow, she was one of my top 5 albums 2 years ago. I think she is maybe Colombian, I'm not sure 100%. I've got down here, that's the best so far. Like, the vocal on it is actually quite compelling, it's actually quite hooky. The Talented Mr. Tripley might be the best title on the album. It's got this underwater trip hop vibe, which isn't that imaginative, but it's got nice ambient sort of trap beats on it, and it progresses a long way for 3 minutes. The track 7, What About Us, there's a lot of features on this album. very low key, very uninteresting, not much in the way of excitement or invention. And track 8, Unbelievable, featuring Ada, again, too low key, and there's too much downtime on this album. There are too many tracks that just don't cut it. It's a nice track, classy. A lot of this album is classy but boring. 9, Donde Vas, Where Are You From? Something like that. It's a 4-minute fragment at this stage of the album where you're waiting for some big payoff. It's not really needed to have that. Track 10, another fragment. It all flows well. That's track 10 is Vamos a la Playa, which again is just, an album with very low key tracks having multiple pauses. It just amplifies that it's not a compelling album. Bruschetta, it's here called Brush Cutter. It's got a nice sort of sub bass and breakbeat vibe going on. Could have done with more of this on the album. It lifts on that track, to be honest. There's a long form track, and he did long form tracks that were much more club based on his previous 2 albums that were highlights of those albums, but it's 8.5 minutes of actually going nowhere. After 3 minutes, it's just like this perfunctory house jam that hasn't really done anything. It does actually take off a bit towards the end. And track 14, Aruna, actually has the warmth of the old albums. Those 2 albums, Knock Knock and Amygdala, were actually really warm. They made you feel nice listening to them. I kind of felt that on that track. And it ends on a very uninteresting Japanese folktronica track. Now, I did review an album recently by Darkside, and I gave it a big tick for being good background music, because when I sit down and face an album, I'll often review it in too harsh a way. So I tried to marry up. This is fantastic background music, but it is not good foreground music. It's the tracks. There isn't a single track on here that you would necessarily pull out and say is as good as a good track on the previous albums. It also is completely uncompelling. It goes from track to track without you actually landing on something and saying I was really pulled into that track. It just moves on to the next one, and that's a real shame. It's a more piecemeal album, I feel, than the predecessors, and it's a more song-based album. It seems like there aren't the big avenues into club builds that you got on the previous albums. There's just a lot more sort of short songs. They just aren't interesting, almost never. There's not really anything on this album that I would pull apart and say is actually really good. So I'm really sad, because I love this man's music and I adore his 2 previous albums, but Music Can Hear Us by DJ Koze I'm going to give At a Push a 6 out of 10.